Welcome to The Joe Cohen Show. Join me as I share my experience with biohacking and invite top health experts to explore the latest technology, supplements, research, and resources for optimizing your body and brain. Hey, everyone. I'm very pleased to be bringing on the podcast Aaron Michael and Dr. Saida Desilet. They have a program called Embodied Love that is a global platform dedicated to making intimacy simple. They have a combined 50 years of experience in scientifically proven methodologies in revolutionizing intimacy, relationships, and sex coaching for both individuals and couples. With 3 published books, over 20 online courses and bespoke programs, and the Embodied Love Lounge podcast, they are changing how the world makes love. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Really awesome to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully by the end of this podcast, I'll become a sex master / guru.
That'd be awesome.
Sex Jedi. There you go.
Yeah, sex Jedi. So I guess let's get started with what's the number one mistake couples are making with their sexual life?
That's a great one. I think from the ladies' side, often it's to get angry that the person doesn't know enough. They're not like understanding their orgasm and the language, and there's like a lot of resentment that can build, or they always want sex and I just don't want it that much. So those are the two big things that we'll hear from the female side.
Who usually wants sex more, the man or the female?
I think with typical things where people aren't very educated in understanding the body that much, you will see that the guy will often be the one tapping on the shoulder and the woman will be like, again, but it's mostly because they're not receiving the kind of pleasure and sex that would really make them go to their guy and go, hey, let's do that again and again. So
Right.
that's where we love to get couples to get to, is that place where they're really sparking each other's desire.
Well, and to add
i.e.
to
the
that,
guy doesn't know what he's doing. I'm kidding. Yeah.
well, I was going to add to that because what we've found is once everything starts going in the right direction, a lot of times the guys almost get overwhelmed. Oh my goodness, what have I untapped here? Because the woman ends up being the one that seems to almost want more.
Yeah, I feel like in my experiences, it's been, I guess it's changed over time because as I've optimized my health, my sex drive got higher. But I always been with women who wanted sex at least once a day. Yeah, and then now my sex drive is a lot higher, so now I could go as much as needed, as much as requested. But
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, how much of the male sex drive do you think is related to overall health?
In terms of, obviously, if you have a bad heart, if you have low cardiovascular capabilities, then that is going to affect the quality of erection. If you have depression, these things are also going to directly affect that. Even if you don't have much access to your own emotions or the ability to connect to someone else emotionally, that also is going to affect sex. And these things, of course, start to increase as age goes on, though they have found recently the largest population of people who are reporting like types of erectile dysfunctions are no longer guys over the age of 50 due to cardiovascular reasons, but actually those in their 30s or somewhat below. And that's typically to do with psychological reasons, such as like performance anxiety and again, depression, things of that nature. So it has a lot to do with it. Though I do think there are some more basic things actually that we train guys to do, which is the ability to have ejaculatory choice. Because once that happens, then it isn't something that just depletes the person's energy. And then it's a matter of like how many times a day can a person start to actually charge their body up from a sexual experience, as opposed to seeing sex as this itch that you scratch and then get rid of.
That's interesting. So in my experience, I found something that helped me a lot is increasing serotonin and I guess dopamine as well. But for me, serotonin was helpful for my sex drive. And I think, yeah, I think it's also helped me be able to open up emotionally. And so for me, emotions are tied to sex. And so I think that they go together for me. Do you see that a lot? How much do you know about the neurochemistry of the sex drive?
When you start to look at sex in terms of you look at oxytocin, you look at serotonin, you look at dopamine, all these different things, neuroepinephrine, these are all things that will actually go up. The interesting thing is, if you look at Nicole Prouse's work, she's found that all of the benefits, especially in terms of the neurochemistry, come before orgasm. So,
Mhm.
like right before reaching that orgasm. But once the orgasm happens, a lot of those things then actually drop off, which I think you'll typically see like when person climaxes and then they're like, okay, now I need to disengage, recharge, want to go to sleep. The conversation isn't there. But she's finding the health benefits actually come right before that orgasmic release. And then if you can stay there and ride that, then you will continue to grow those effects and benefits.
Yeah, so we call that state relaxed arousal, which sounds unusual because usually typically you think of the nervous system as an arousal system and a relaxation system. But when you can modulate them well together, you get this state where you're relaxed and you're aroused. And when you're in that state is when you are actually benefiting the most from arousal and from sexual interaction.
What do you guys think of, let's say, alcohol for? I find that alcohol tanks my whole sexual system.
There's a lot of different reasons for that. I think people use alcohol as a way to relax and to become less inhibited. But there are many other ways to do that where you're not having to suffer then the side effects of having too much alcohol. Because when you have too much alcohol and the liver gets stressed, that affects your hormones in the body. And it's actually problematic over the long term. Maybe if it's just once in a while, it's okay. But if it's a daily habit, it can become actually really affect not just alcohol, also the use of other recreational substances and maybe in the moment are fun, but then over the long term really affect the brain chemistry and function. So a
Like
lot of
what?
what
What
we're,
other substances?
I was thinking of long term use of marijuana, for example. In the moment can feel nice. It can actually enhance sensation, but long term use has been shown to show that, especially for guys, it's affects the erection, for example. And then you have
Um,
things like MDMA, which can feel sexy to people and make them feel more connected. But a lot of times it's really hard for a guy to get an erection or maintain an erection in that kind of altered state, unless there's certain things in place, maybe you can talk about. But so we have very natural ways that we can help induce the body almost into psychedelic states just through using the body and breath and connection, which is amazing. And then you don't have all the downers after the experience. You actually feel better and healthier.
right.
So, for instance, what I've noticed that if a person is typically coming a lot, then they maybe their state of erection is definitely going to be diminished while on MDMA. It's like everything becomes a little bit more limp and loose, just like the body has a little bit less
Loosey
rigidity
goosey.
into it, then the same quality of the erection is that way. However, if you are not coming a lot, and let's say you just have a high sexual charge, or you just typically have really strong erections because the rest of your health is optimized, then you will be able to still have the MDMA, but not have then that it might not be at the full capacity, but it's still good enough that you're going to be able to enjoy the pleasure, get into it. And then some guys are going to notice that they can actually last longer in that state because now they're not as edgy because that erection again, like has gone from, let's say being at 100%, I'm about to come all the time to maybe like a 90, 80%, which is good enough. Make
Yeah,
sense?
I don't notice any negative, just sexual effects from MDMA, just positive ones, just personally.
Awesome.
You were
So
definitely one of
that's
the lucky ones.
but that's interesting. I didn't realize that it was more of an individual thing that most people actually it can worsen their sexual function in a certain way.
Yeah, but they don't seem to care as much because they're connected and having this great time and it's very sensual. And they just notice that, oh, I can't actually maintain an erection, but they're having such a great time. There's less attention needed on that.
Some people also will use alcohol in a similar way that they notice, hey, I can last longer. I still get the erection. Alcohol doesn't affect it. But as either the strength or the dosage starts to go up, typically then that will be less rewarding in terms
Mhm.
of the ability to connect. This is also, we're looking at the ability to have all of your motor reflexes in in tip top shape. The ability then to like coordinate your body mechanics become important during a sexual experience. The ability to also verbalize and show with your body what it is that you do or don't want. Another one that people will typically use, for instance, is like ketamine. And if you're a person who has a lot of anxiety, then ketamine will neutralize that. However, if you're a person who's typically connected to your body, then the ketamine, when it neutralizes your body charge or like that connection to your body, all of a sudden that can make you feel anxious because you're used to being connected. Whereas a
Yes.
person who's normally in an anxious state, it feels good to then have that anxiety go away because they've disconnected from their body and it's like a reset. So it's a
Very
lot of it
individual.
depends on where your nervous system is at and then what substance you put inside yourself.
Yes, I feel like ketamine is really helpful for people who get in loops and things like that. Yeah, for me, I don't notice any negative or positive effect of ketamine on sexual function. Do you guys drink alcohol often, or what's
Um,
your personal
Not really.
pre
I think maybe the last glass of wine I had was about a month ago. So no, I
Okay.
rarely ever drink.
I don't at all. I think I got drunk the first time I was 3 because I ate all the strawberries out of the New Year's punch. And the next time I had alcohol, I think I was 20 and realized I'm going to be a really naughty girl if someone doesn't send me home quickly. And that was my last times. I don't really like the effect. I think I'm naturally so open. I have so much energy. I feel alcohol is a bit of a downer actually on my system. I want
That's
to
what I
feel
feel like, actually. I find that it makes me even worse, doesn't disinhibit, it just
Mhm.
because it makes me a little more tired and it ruins
Exactly.
my sleep. I did drink last night, though, but I feel like the reason I drink is just on first dates, just because I know the other person often needs it, and then it's weird if they're drinking alone. So I'm just like, "Alright,
Right.
whatever."
That was literally the situation a month ago. We had gone out to a dinner. Person was like, "Hey, this is a nice meal. I want to have a glass of white wine. You want to try this with the fish that we're having?" Okay, fine, let's try it. If you look at that nervous tension that is there as an energy that then you can harness for connection, then you can actually, as opposed to neutralizing it, use it to create more chemistry, to create more pleasure and more sensation between the two of you.
I think if you don't
Alright.
understand certain things, you can be scared by them, right? We're afraid of most things. And what we noticed is people somehow think with the topic of sex that they actually already fully understand it. They're already a Olympic athlete in this department and they don't actually need any help. And what we've discovered is that even with healthy couples who have a great sex life, when they learn just even a few new basic ways to use their breath and move their bodies together, they realize I don't think I even knew anything about sex before this moment. And that's such an exciting moment for us to see someone really wake up to this amazing potential that's asleep in every single person's body. And I think if more of the population actually understood that they have access to this at any time, because you don't need any drugs, any alcohol, you just need to understand some really basics about your body, how to breathe, and some mechanics, and be able to create extraordinary sensations for yourself and another person, you probably walk into a date feeling like Superman or Superwoman and just feeling great.
One of the recent episodes that we just released on our podcast was called Cervical Orgasms and Psychedelic States. And we go into like details around how it is that when you start to especially stimulate the cervix and you create that energy between the head of the penis as well as cervix, these altered states that you quickly can go into that are extremely intimate, bonding, but also then ridiculously sensational.
Mhm.
So, you're saying that these things can bring you in a, psychedelic state. So, I'm assuming that psychedelics can also you guys are looking at psychedelics favorably as regard to sexual health?
Well, I'll just speak for myself. I prefer the natural body just because it's available to everyone. There's a lot of populations on the planet that don't have access to a lot. And so a lot of my work has been like, how do I make this accessible to as many people? But if it is available, I just like people to understand what is it that you're playing with. And yes, play with that. That's like a little door. Understand the door is there. But once you've opened that door, you don't actually need that anymore because the door has been opened you can actually now access that over and over again, just naturally with your own body and breathing and how you're moving.
These breathing techniques, is that before the sex or during?
Yeah, I love this question. And I'm going to take a little loop to get to the answer, but I feel so many trainings are essentially teaching us all the things to do before or after sex. Like a lot of sex advice I feel is really about, oh, how do you talk to your partner about it? Or if you go to like it's not even tantra really, but neo tantra practices, all these like eye gazing rituals and things that you can do beforehand. But when it comes down to it, no one's talking about what to actually do during sex. So when we're talking about understanding the hip coordination, talking about the pelvic floor movements, the way to use breath, the way to use voice, and not as separate tools, but as a totally holistic embodied practice that your whole body as a unit starts to coordinate with another body that you then have two become one. This is almost sounds like some of the spiritual terms that you'll find in like the different texts around that. This is then where those changes happen. For instance, when Adamo Sciences hired us to put together a medical protocol, the original thought was we're going to have a psychedelic assisted aspect to this penetration protocol. But then, as we then put our part of that together, it quickly became obvious that, oh, wait, the psychedelics maybe aren't needed. And so it's an agnostic protocol that we built for Adamo Sciences. And that's what the Adamo method is, a combination of our work for that. And it actually turned out well because then the FDA didn't approve MDMA, but the protocol still worked perfectly fine. In fact, exceptionally so in terms of increasing sexual satisfaction, increased intimacy. It helped remove the orgasm gap. It was ridiculous actually, the amount of the statistics, the results that came through.
So let's break this into two different kinds of
Mhm.
sexual situations, if we will. One is shorter term partners, and one is longer term partners. Is there any difference between the techniques there? I assume that longer term has probably some additional techniques.
We put a warning on our
Yeah.
protocol.
You definitely, when you learn to move and breathe and bring this to the table with another person, you need a warning because you do get bonded and connected. So if you do not want that in your experience, you just have to know fair game. Okay, I'm coming in. This person might become instantly addicted to this experience because it'll be like no other experience they've ever had.
It also will attach you too. So if you're just wanting to have this person be a one night stand, then you might start feeling that, hey, I'm actually like bonded with this person. If you look at attachment patterns, you have your secure attachment, you have avoidant attachment, and you have anxious attachment, then you have disoriented, et cetera. But just to keep it simple with these three types, the ability to both move, and this like secure attachment is not normally defined very well, but if you look at like how bodies connect, typically a person who's anxiously attached, they're very romantic, they want to go ahead and have everything very close, and they need that sense of like we're one. Whereas a person who's more anxiously attached, they're wanting to, I don't know what kind of language we're allowed to use on your podcast, but
Any language goes.
people want to fuck and they want to like have their chests and bodies apart, maybe hit it from behind. That kind of language starts to come into play. The thing about a person, at least as we define secure attachment, is to have a dynamism there, the ability to both create connection, to feel that intimacy and that romance, but then also to be able to pull a person's body apart and go into that more animalistic side of it. So that way there's a dynamic feel to the sexual experience without then triggering that other person or without triggering yourself because you need to have it in just one way. And that then will create one, a very interesting like first experience, but it's also the key to having a long-term relationship. And in fact, long-term romance depends on having shared hobbies, shared interests. And what better thing is that than sex? What normally breaks that though for long-term couples is the routine because everyone goes, I have my ABC that I normally do. And then I've learned my partner's XYZ and we'll just basically do
Swap and swap.
yeah, let's repeat and rinse. And people's pleasure are typically defined as opposite one another. So it's okay, you have one person, I get mine, and then you get yours. But in this case, it's more like a dance. Everyone's pleasure complements one another and supplements one another. And so what ends up happening is you have an ability. We're not giving people techniques. We're giving them, so we talk about increasing their sexual IQ. They have a set of tools to better understand what each person is becoming aware of so they can attune better to one another. And then from there, they literally can go into discovery, exploration, curiosity, which is essential. So that way you don't just run into the routine, and things like long-term romance, long-term intimacy, long-term lust and commitment are possible because they all feed into each other.
Yeah. I would have to say that one of the things that gets quote unquote boring in the longer term is that you know the sex type that you're going to have. And there's some days where you're just not in the mood for that type. So then you're a no. What if every day you could bring creativity to it and you could meet what was true for both people? So if you're both really tired, sex is going to look different than when you're both super energized. And it'll going to look even different when one of you has energy and the other one doesn't, and vice versa. So there's a lot of dynamic ways in which you can play together. And that's essentially what we're interested in, is giving people the skill set to really be creative, to listen, and to optimize coming together.
That's very interesting. This is the first time I'm ever like really studying sex, if you will. Before I just my approach is just do whatever I feel. Like whatever feels natural. That's just been my approach. Whatever feels natural. And what I find is that I don't know, for me it's I like different things. I also have storylines that I'm a huge fan of whispering, and every time is a different storyline. So
Yeah,
it's
erotic
like
talk.
yeah, I don't know. So it's like a different yeah, I don't even know what story I'm gonna say, whatever. It's a different thing every time. And then I don't even remember it after. I'm just like, I don't what did I say?
You were the big bad wolf.
This is
Yeah.
actually something that's really key, and I think it also would distinguish you as a lover because, unfortunately, even though you would think that sex is one of our most social activities by the nature of it, it's typically where people are also the most quiet. You'll be at a party, you'll be all this talking, all this loudness, but then when it comes to sex, a lot of people go quiet.
Yeah. I've gotten feedback from women that I'm one of the only guys I think every girl has told me, like, "You talk more than any guy during sex." And, like, a lot of girls are I've seen a fair bit. The first time, they're a little uncomfortable because they're not aware of it, but then
Yeah.
all of them come to like it. It's I don't know, it was interesting. I've seen it many times. They're just like, "What are you doing exactly? This is a little weird." And then after the second time, they start to like it.
Yeah, that
Have you
makes
seen
sense.
that? Is that a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of just even using sounds, that can be very awkward for a person at first. And I think a lot of times people go to the sounds that they hear in porn. And so they go, "Ah, ah," no, then
Uh,
it becomes a performance really quickly. And then in terms of when people start to talk and use erotic talk, they're also a little bit shy because they typically are going to say the stuff that they saw in porn. So, yeah, you want this big cock or yeah, spread open, like, and it gets like it's not really connected to what's happening. And so when we start to teach people to use erotic talk, it actually is much more simple things. It's tell the person what you're feeling, tell the person what you want, what you like, and what you love. And from there, then it can play into stories, etc. But it starts to bring up actual communication that's genuine and in the moment, as opposed to let's go into a fantasy world that's maybe not really happening right here or even what the other person is wanting to hear. And like
Mhm.
it stays out of performance and into the sensational.
Yeah. It sounds like,
yeah.
Joe, that you're really good at listening. So not only are you good at expressing, but you're actually good at listening. And I don't mean that necessarily just with your ears. Like you're instinctually listening to the person you're with. And then the story that streams out of you is actually attuned to what you're seeing in responses in their body,
Are
which
you
is,
sexually psychic, Joe?
I don't know.
Like reading their
No, but
inner thought?
I think you might be right because what I say also is very dependent on like just it's the situation. It's almost hard to describe it. Like in the beginning, it's going to be a different. What I say is different. It's more on in line of what you were saying, that what do I appreciate about somebody? It's just different. And then once you progress, it becomes more like fantasy. So going through different fantasies, and I think the fantasies also get more advanced as you know somebody more. So you start off
Exactly.
Yes.
with very basic fantasies, and then you could see what the other person is responding to, but it is very interesting because once in a while, it could be that, like, somebody would be like, "Alright, I've had this situation a few times. Oh, I'm not really digging that, whatever." I'd be like, "Okay." And then the next time, they're just like, "I am digging that." Like, it was
You
just
hone
like,
in.
yeah,
Yeah,
the other person starts to get more in sync. It's like something if they haven't experienced something, they don't know how to react to it, and then they're just like, "You
exactly.
know what? Now that I'm" like, I feel like people are inhibited about being almost a little reptilian in some ways, right?
The other beautiful part, Joe, of what you're doing and what we all could be doing is we also can be attentive to how this can heal. So if there's, say, more in a long-term relationship, someone a little bit more, and you realize that they have an inhibition in one particular area, but they're still curious, but they're just like, that's scary to me, or I had a bad experience in the past. You could build fantasy around it in a way that feels actually sexy and safe and bring their erotic mind alive and actually really recapture some of that erotic space that can be dulled when there's pain or trauma associated. So that's what's actually profound about having sex is you're creating more oxytocin, which is brain plasticity, and you actually can rewrite a lot of old patterns while you're having sex. So it's not only just fun, there's a lot of things you can optimize together in that state.
Yeah, and I think it's the other person has to be ready for that also,
Yeah.
because sometimes I see people scared to open up,
Yeah.
and a lot of times, like, I usually suspect that it's some past trauma, but you could see they're afraid to open up emotionally. And for me, I'm not someone who can have sex without emotions there. So I have to open up emotionally in order to have good sex. I've noticed a lot of people feel inhibited in opening up emotionally, and that could, if I think that also goes to the sexual realm where if they can't open up emotionally, then they also can't open up sexually. What do you guys think of that?
I would completely agree. The thing is, there's a narrative, I think, that is in our subconscious that if we have a really great sexual experience, then that means that person is potentially the one, which then means that we go into love. And then when we fall in love, then there's a conflation of love and falling in love, but you fall in love. And then from falling in love, you end up having to do like the whole kids and the lifelong together. Now, there's also, I think, the biological components, and it isn't just something that's in our psyche. I think the biology also supports that as well in terms of that you first start to, as you get like high levels of oxytocin, even like people that are falling in love, they have lowered levels of serotonin, which makes you a bit neurotic. And you start to focus on this one person, which would be the evolutionary drive to be with one person at first, get pregnant with them, and then as you start to move into the kind of a more romantic love, well, first of all, I guess it would be like almost like the raised levels of adrenaline that kind of draw this lust forward, which makes you just want to mate. And that's what you'd find like an avoidant type of person would be going more for that. But then when you start to really connect and those serotonin levels start to drop and you start to fall in love for a person who's rather avoidant, or even if this doesn't mean that you're avoidant from childhood, it could be that just contextually, you're going out to a club, you don't want to get into a relationship. Maybe you just broke up. You meet a guy who's good looking, has a great jawline, really nice hair and everything else, such as yourself. And then he's like, all of a sudden though, you start to fuck them in a way that like really starts to open up their heart. And they're like, whoa, I wasn't ready for actually going this deep and starting to have these other feelings that start to come online. And so then a block comes down because then where does that lead? I'm back in a relationship all of a sudden, and that means that I'm emotionally vulnerable. And then I start having desires and wants from this person who originally, if he was a good looking guy who picked me up in the club, I wanted to have a good one night stand, fly back out of town and go on with my life. There is there's a way to both on the person being inhibited, but I think there's also like a legitimate concern there as well, especially if you're the person being entered. There's a different psychology there than just the person who's doing the entering, like almost as if their body in some sense gets, I don't want to say possessed, but they're getting filled with you. And that's really
Right.
emotionally opening and vulnerable in a different way than for us that are doing the entering.
There's also a lot of things that can be inhibiting, such as if you grew up in a religious setting or a certain cultural setting where these things are viewed in a very particular way and you're up against those views, even if you yourself don't adhere to them, there's sometimes there in your head, what are you doing? You're being a slut or you're doing a this thing. So sometimes those are the things that get in the way. So it's not always the romantic things. Sometimes maybe they were told over and over again, only certain types of women do this and certain types of guys do that. And now you're doing the thing you're not supposed to be doing.
And it turns you on,
And
but you
it's
don't
really
want to.
exciting and you want to, but it's a bad thing. So there's a lot going on for people when it comes to sex. What we're attempting to do is trying to normalize, like, hey guys, like arousal is a healthy function. It means you're healthy, you're vital. Having desire is really healthy. It's a good sign. It's great. Wanting to connect with another person, whatever degree that might be, is a very human thing. So why don't we do that better? Why don't we actually learn to communicate better? This is why the solo trainings that we do, we really encourage anyone, whether you are actually like single or your partner, the solo trainings make you a better lover across the board. They make you more responsible in terms of your own emotions, more responsible in terms of communicating what works with your body, what doesn't work. And it makes you more responsible in attuning to another person because attunement isn't just one way. Attunement is bi-directional. And we have this weird idea that receivers should be passive and that givers are really active. But we switch that around with this work where we want people who are on the receiving end to be more active and people who are on the giving end to be more adaptive. And that's a really huge part of what we're doing.
Yeah, I actually grew up in quite a religious environment. I also had a lot of this baggage, this cultural baggage that because I grew up in a very close society. So I had a lot of cultural baggage that it was weird to touch women because I never was never touching women.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a thing that you would do. So yeah, it was a little weird. And then I also had some health issues where my serotonin was lower. So it was like a combination of a lot of things combined.
Mhm.
But I found that, yeah, so breaking out of I feel like a lot of sexual constraints have to do with it's a lot of the psychological issues people have is the inner desires combating with the cultural norms often. People want to be proper and normal and like adhere to all the cultural norms. But then I think people intrinsic desires often are competing with that, and people often have competing intrinsic desires as well. So this kind of dissonance between all these desires makes it hard for people to open up and just be disinhibited and do what they feel, right?
Mhm.
There's this
Yeah.
I notice this fear in people of opening up emotionally, and I think that connects sometimes to sexually.
Again, this can be mitigated when a person really does have a solo cultivation practice. Because when you start to understand feeling open in your emotions and being open in your body is actually a health optimization. And you do it gently, you titrate it over a period of time. So everyone has their own, say, rhythm to learning. Some people take longer than others. But this is a really key and crucial element. And I've seen it across the spectrum in all of my students, whether they're like late teens, all the way. My oldest student was 90 years old, from people who are like super long term couples to people who are like, I don't know, serial dating people. They never,
Serial monogamous, yeah.
no, they're not even monogamy. They
Okay.
just date and date and
Okay, yeah.
never, So all of that kind of behavior can be shifted when you start having a better relationship with yourself
Yeah.
in the archetype of lover, where you actually relate to yourself as a lover and you take the time to really get to know yourself. I know for me, I experienced a very violent rape experience. I had to heal from it. Nearly it cost me my life. And in the healing process of that, there was a moment in my solo cultivation where I felt, and maybe this is a bit odd to say, but I felt like I touched God in those moments of deep cosmic orgasms by myself. And I thought, how the heck am I going to have sex with a human being after this? Because this is so amazing. And then what I recognized after that process was, oh, this isn't about going to someone and making them become this extraordinary thing for me. It's about celebrating the mystery that arises because I can't predict what another person is going to bring. And that's the fun of connected partnered experiences. Whereas the fun of solo experiences, I can take myself wherever I want to go. And that's a liberation.
Interesting. I'm curious about one of the things. Most of what I do is it's just however I feel, but there is a little bit of there's some interaction for me in the sense of I will focus more on something based on how somebody is reacting to something. So I could see what I noticed, and I don't have a framework for this. I'm curious if you have a framework. I've noticed that women have like different erotic things, like different things that they react to. So sometimes, for example, there's maybe different erotic spots. Some women really like their neck, their ears. Some people really respond to whispering very well. Some people, yeah, respond to different places, and yeah, you like test the waters with a few things. You see what somebody really likes, and then you could see, okay, this is their weak spot, right? This is where they really get turned on. What kind of do you have any framework around that of what like different types of people like different types of things? Like what the main points are that really attract people?
Yeah. If you're looking towards, you talked about two things. One is the mental arousal type that a person has. Typically, I've noticed probably around 6 different factors that people have in terms of mental arousal. Then if you were to look at quality of touch, there are around like 6 different kind of ways that you can touch. But I think it's interesting to apply not just that touch in terms of with the hands, but then that same type of touch can be applied to like penetration itself. But then you also have the way within which touch is being done. Is it touching that person for your pleasure? Are you touching that person for their pleasure? Are they being touched for their own pleasure? Are they being touched for your pleasure? And all 4 of those things are very different factors. And I think this is one of the things that we will typically notice with, I think you'd asked earlier on, what is it that throws couples off? And a lot of times there seems to be a dynamic where the guy is incorrectly reading his partner and basically going, "Oh, I'm touching you for your pleasure," but they're doing it in a way that actually is just for their own.
Mhm.
And the other
Mm,
person is actually thinking that they're being touched for their pleasure, but what they're doing is just allowing the other person to do it for their pleasure.
mm,
It becomes this miscommunication and things really go off there because things aren't being read correctly. Because again, not only do we not feel comfortable communicating and speaking what we want, if we even know what that is, but then we also don't embody it, that our body actually is what's expressing it, but our body is also that's what's feeling it. You might not notice, but a lot of women, if you were to ask them what is their biggest turn on, what gives them the most pleasure, they would actually say your response as opposed to actually feeling their own body.
Yep.
Because the biggest
mm,
epidemic, in my opinion, from what I've found and what we found together, is that it's not actually pain, it's numbness, which
Mhm.
shows up psychologically as boredom.
They also found in, I forget which research it was, but 80% of women's female desire is actually based on being desired. So it won't activate until they can feel desire coming toward them. There is a 20% where that's not true, but that's a large amount of the population where if they're not feeling the arousal, the desire for them, then they're not really connected to it. Another part of the answer, which I wanted to give, is that there is any such thing as an erotic fingerprint. And that erotic fingerprint is unique, just like your fingerprint is. Each person has a very particular way in which they respond erotically. The beautiful thing, though, about the erotic fingerprint is it's not permanent like a finger one. It can evolve and be malleable and you can grow. But the original fingerprint is the nuts and bolts of a person. Like you can always go back to that and it's going to be good. And then there's some expansion that goes beyond that.
Nice. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, what are some of your top ways to prevent sex from getting boring in like a long-term relationship? If I were to look at relationships as like a meme in a way, you have guys who are like chasing in the beginning and women have their guard up, and then women get emotionally invested, and then guys start to think, do I really want this relationship? Like after a guy is in a relationship or whatever, is in something for a certain amount of time, they like the first the woman is like thinking, would I want to marry this guy? Theoretically, probably subconsciously. And if they're like, yeah, okay, then they'll get into something. And the guy is just thinking more with his penis initially. And then he starts thinking, do I really want to be in a, would I want to marry this person? Right. I feel like the guy is, there's more of a tendency in men for multiple partners and they're more likely to get bored long term. That could happen for women also. But I'm just saying, I think it's more inbuilt in men. What are some tips around that?
Well, I think let's look at it from also like a hormonal structure because for those of us females that have higher testosterone, we tend to also be hunters and we tend to also like have a bit of aversion to like too much romance in the onset. So I want to, there is a guy and a girl thing, but I've also noticed, I don't know if it's because men are having less testosterone these days and what's going on with women becoming more expressed and leading jobs and if their levels are going up. But I've also noticed, at least for me, that was true. I was more of a huntress than I was a prey. And I liked that. I was like, I didn't have an issue with I want you and that's what I want. I only want you for tonight and bye-bye tomorrow. And so I think when you're looking at sex as something recreational versus as something that I'm only going to open my body to the man of my dreams who's going to have my baby. These are really different places to come into the scene. And one of the studies they found with speed dating is they made the assumption that you just talked about that men are the hunters, women are the prey, meaning because as the men would switch woman would a woman, that was what the assumption was. Now, a really smart scientist said, what if we reverse the tables? What if the men are stationary and we get the women to go around? And it was complete. The women became the predators and the men were prey, and the men behaved like prey and the women behaved like predators. There's social behavior that's in place that we all accept. And I know as a female body, I actually prefer to be hunted than to hunt, but I'm happy to hunt if I'm hungry. So it's one of those things. So socially, we condition one another, right? I've literally had a partner who hated if I initiated sex. He was like, that is a turnoff. I am the man. I initiate. I'm like, then initiate. Because once a month isn't enough. Like, I want this every day. And he wouldn't initiate daily. So it was a frustration in that particular relationship. So that said, I think I'll let Aaron like come back to the question, but I just wanted to frame that there are some social behaviors that we just all agree to play in. And it's not necessarily true of the inherent person because there are men who have very sensitive hearts who cannot be sexual without being in love. Their erections won't even work. And then there are women who don't want to be sexual unless they're the one hunting, just to put that out there.
How common do you think that is in terms of women who like to be more the dominant one? Do you think it's like 10% of women or
Mm.
yeah.
I think it's again what they found when they allowed gave women permission to do the hunting and had the men actually be receptive is 100% across the board. All the women were really excited to be the ones moving around and choosing and flirting. And so I think it's just what's socially acceptable. What are you indoctrinated in? How were you brought up?
Mm,
Everyone's taught that women are passive, women want this and that, and men want that. But I've had to turn down a lot of partners because they wanted babies and I didn't. And the guys wanted to
mhm.
settle down and have the families. I did not. I was socialized more like a boy because my dad was like, didn't have a son and I was the first, so I was like his son. So, how we're socialized really has that impact. And of course, there are like female hormones that really do affect, and they are very different. So testosterone is a very intense hormone. And, if you have elevated levels, I think one time when we were training really hard with an Olympic trainer and he injected me, I don't know with what. And I said, I don't know what's going on, but all I want to do is like feast, fight, and fuck. Like that's all I wanted. Like I was just in this crazy mode and I couldn't get any sleep because that was like, it was just for a full week. It was really intense.
Welcome to the life of a man.
So I think it's really important to also notice those things and what are the activities in life that up those kinds of qualities, like a person is more fit and getting out there and eating like certain types of foods. That's going to elevate certain types of hormones, where if they're sedentary or depressed, that's also going to really lower. So it's just a very interesting thing. I prefer to look at individuals as dynamic individuals, and you're never stuck where you are as because you optimize, you changed your life. It's within everyone's capacity to do that.
If we want to talk like specifically around, do you want this answer to come around more around the mental arousal aspect or with not getting bored with sex itself? Or how would you like me to specify into that? Cause I'm happy to dive in any which direction you want.
Yeah, the truth is, I think I used to get bored in sex after some time. Not bored, but I would need more breaks. I would need to like take a break for a couple days, or maybe if I travel for a week and then I could miss somebody, and that missing somebody allows it to renew and reset a little bit.
Yep.
Just kind of, I would say before. Now I'm probably, I think improving my sex drive has gone up significantly over the years. So I'm not sure what I'm now recently. I haven't been in a long-term relationship for a bit, so I don't know. Can't say. Hasn't gotten bored yet.
Circle back
Um,
to when you are.
right. That's what I'm thinking is we need to circle back when I am, see what happens, because I don't know.
And so I was actually writing my thesis on the psychology of love and specifically why it was that men and women were successful at picking up one another. And I was looking at it from a linguistic perspective as well as cognitive scientific perspective. So I was studying cognitive semiotics and looking at like, how does the brain interpret love? And there's a couple things that came to mind when you are speaking. Out of all the papers, I must have read over 1,000 papers that were on different things with attachment. And there's a lot of things on romance and love, but I literally found, I think it was 3 or 5 papers that were on long-term romance. There was hardly anything on it. I think it's a little bit harder to research that, and there just isn't many instances of it. But the thing that they found, which was consistent in long-term romance, was that one, the couple said, yeah, that romance at the beginning, it's rather exhausting. So they're happy to be on the other side of this kind of illusion that continually staying in this super romantic feeling was a positive thing. But then when they asked them, what is it that is at the key of your long-term romance? And it was that one, that they had shared hobbies, and two, that they played together. So this really comes well together when you can take then, when it comes to sex, can you actually have sex as a shared playful hobby? And there's two things that are interesting about hobbies and being playful. One, when you do a hobby, you are being curious. It's not like you have an end goal. Like when you have a hobby of playing a musical instrument, maybe at the beginning you start playing the guitar because you want to woo a person, or maybe you want to be able to do Stairway to Heaven on your guitar, whatever the song is that normally motivates you. But once it becomes a hobby, you just love doing that thing, and you will continuously be more curious and curious about it just because of the nature of it. So I could imagine that if you are looking for the different codes that you're figuring out of this person that you're hooking up with, once you figure that out and then you do it several times, okay, I figured that out. It's not so interesting anymore. And so that curiosity goes down. The thing about it when sex can become a hobby in the way that we are teaching it is a way that you can continually start to find more layers to that person and dive deeper, because as you uncover more who they are and how they show up in that relationship actually changes. The playful aspect and the thing about being playful, which normally happens in a hobby, is that you start to experiment. When you're playful, you're not in a routine. You're literally just being very present in that moment and new things come up. So if you can both have the ability to be playful and as well see sex as your shared hobby, then there really is no limit to what you can find, because there's always new ways to be curious and new ways to be inventive, and that will keep you out of that routine. So that's a general answer. I mean, I can go into some specifics, but that's how I would say long-term romance is possible.
I also think an answer, because what you were saying, like you need a break and then you like that feeling of building up
Mhm.
again. One of the principles of um, building charge between the two of you is that it actually creates more attraction and less that downer. And that's a specific technique that we work with is how do you start building this charge between the bodies so that you're more and more curious and more desirous versus that need for like space so that the charge can build up again.
And this is an
So
age-old thing. Oh, so go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, so just so are you guys in favor of, let's say, taking a week break to build up charge, or what's your thoughts on that?
There's a couple ways that you can build up anticipation, let's say, because when do you feel two magnets the most? When they're held apart. Second, you bring them
Right.
together, you don't feel that energy. So
Right.
one way you can do it is, yes, by having time apart. The other thing that you can do, though, to build up that charge is also then taking the time to come together. So, for instance, in your everyday life, if you're not just constantly next to one another, but you have a natural space and ebb and a flow to your relationship, where you have some things that you like to do on your own, some things that they like to do on their own, or as she was saying, the importance of solo practice, where you really do take the time and enjoy your own company, then you're bringing a lot more to the table when you do come together. Now, the third part that I think very few people will look at is, again, this ejaculatory choice. Now, I don't know if you've been having sexual experiences where you actually choose not to ejaculate and notice what happens.
I usually ejaculate before the women orgasms. That's just I just wait till the woman is ready and then I do it. That's how I do it. I feel like
So
it's also better to do it at the same time, more pleasurable.
this is the thing. There's a difference between ejaculation and orgasm. And this is, I think, something that the guy can really drive on, but it actually plays out the same way for a lot of women. When a woman is to, for instance, stimulates her clitoris, and then after you go into that refractory period where like, I can't be stimulated, I need that pause, whether it's because the guy's ejaculated or the woman's had a clitoral based orgasm, that refractory period, wherever the orgasm, however that orgasm is happening, typically that discharges a lot of that sexual tension and buildup. So the more that you can start to have other forms of orgasm and allow your nervous systems to go more into the parasympathetic state as opposed to a sympathetic orgasm, then you will literally start to build that charge up between one another. That pleasure capacity is there. I think maybe how most people relate to it is, if you go ahead, you just met a girl, you have a really quick fuck, you don't really know her. And then when you're done, you're okay, go away now. And it flows both directions. I mean, as you were saying that you're like, hey, I have this guy for the one night, do the deed, and then bye bye. I don't want anything else there. However, if the body doesn't have that release and you stay at these heightened states of arousal, you're going to notice that the other person is like, wants more of you, wants more of you, wants more of you. And then that charge can actually build in a way that you do not need to be, okay, a week away from one another.
Yeah. So the cool thing about this is that it's completely learnable. There's a program we have called the FOP, and we have guys who tend to come to it first because there's an issue, not because there's nothing, but you can also come to it as an optimization choice. But for those who say have an issue and they can't even last beyond a certain 30 seconds, a minute, within day 3 of practice, which is not a lot of practice, they're already gone from less than a minute to lasting half an hour. And then it's a 21-day challenge. Like, how long can you do this? And so we have 21 days. And by day 14, those guys are just like, I don't know what's going on with this, but I'm going into other realms. So I think what men don't understand is the full spectrum of what's available to them with pleasure and with orgasm, because naturally the way that most guys touch their bodies is also how they're having sex, and how they're touching their bodies and how they're having sex is going to be just the thing that's been normalized, the thing that you see all the time. So when you start to understand, oh, there's actually another option, I can this way, or I can do this thing, suddenly you open up a whole new universe of possibility. And I find that really exciting for the guys. And it immediately translates into the bedroom, which is quite awesome.
Interesting. What do you think of so in terms of you mentioned orgasming and not ejaculating for a guy. How does somebody do that? How does a guy do that?
There's 7 different tools that I cover in the AFAP program. One of them is the ability to actually engage all your senses so that you're not just localizing your sensation to your genitals. The other one is the connection, the emotional connection between your heart and your genitals. So being able to open up emotionally is going to be able to help you also feel more, and then be able to also last longer because you are in an emotional state of not just bottling everything up. The third one is the ability to really express with your voice. Again, if you are not using your voice, again, you have that tendency to bottle things up. The ability to breathe more fully so that you're not just breathing in your chest and not just breathing even in your belly, which is what you hear most advice, but actually allowing your breath to go down into your pelvic floor. Most of us are breathing backwards in that sense, which is going to create more pelvic floor tension, which means that then you don't get as much blood flow to the genitals and you're more likely to go into either premature ejaculation or delayed ejaculation. There's the way that you
Okay.
move your body, your hips. Typically, guys are thrusting from their legs, and then they don't really get a lot of the motor control that allows for like precise penetration. And then they just get shocked when all of a sudden pleasure builds up and boop, they go over the edge, as opposed to remaining conscious of where their arousal levels are at. And then the last two ones are your ability to actually use like visualizations, like more on an energetic level, or realizing that you're like feeling out into the room as opposed to, again, just thinking of that of the person's genitals. And then the way that you use touch on your body to help remove different places of
Mhm.
tension that are there, like ways you can massage your perineum, ways you can stretch your cock. So that way, then there's an easier flow of circulation and energy.
Interesting. Have you noticed that some people are very sensitive to smells in terms of attraction? Like,
Absolutely.
I'm a huge smell guy. I think that's, like, the number one thing. So for me, it's like I can open up emotionally very easily, and I'm open during sex. The smells is what will just destroy. Like, if it's coming from anywhere, breath, wherever, it's like, uh-oh, boom, 0.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah, our sense of smell is our most primitive of the senses. Some smells can even like, send you into full shutdown if it's associated with something bad that happened in the past. And smells are also, you're picking up pheromones. And when you don't like a smell, it's actually important because it indicates like there's not a match here. And so it's actually great that you're aware, like, I actually don't like that smell. That's a great thing because you save
Yeah, but
yourself a lot of
it's so
heartache.
common for me. It's 80% is, like,
Yeah.
not fitting with the smell. Is
It,
that normal?
Yeah, it's your body, like, just going, I know what I like and I know what I wanna open up to, and we're not meant to open up to 100% of the population, not how
Right.
human beings are designed. There is natural selection, and the way that you're designed will be attracted to a very specific range of smell. Now, if someone just has bad hygiene, that's like something else. I used to use like, let me bathe you, let me get those feet, whatever it would be.
That's, I think, smell is a huge indicator of a person's state of health.
Mhm.
So, I
Right.
mean, animals are constantly
Sniffing.
doing this with one another. And just because it's not at the front of our awareness, it is definitely still a huge part of us to know, okay, this is something that's, whether we acknowledge it one way or another, that this is a person who is unhealthy. Now, they've also done studies too, though, in terms of finding quote unquote genetic matches. I think they were like looking at women where they were smelling t-shirts, and they noticed that the women who were choosing guys' scents, whose sweaty t-shirts that most resembled that of their fathers, which I think is an interesting spin there. But
Well, that probably feels safe. There's a safety factor. There's a lot of factors that come into
and there could be
smell.
some form of a genetic or DNA match being
Mhm.
tapped into.
Super interesting.
So keep that sniffer active.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you guys ever recommend like threesomes, or that's not part of any protocol?
We never recommend anything, but we definitely like to educate on everything, if that makes sense. So you're the person
Okay.
that's choosing, whatever's right for you, but we do like to give conscious information so that you're making great choices. And if threesomes are intriguing, then there's really wonderful ways to create good experiences there.
And I think what you're also saying by not recommending, meaning that we're not prescriptive. And
Hmm.
I think this is something that's
Right.
really important. When you go to a sex therapist or a sex coach or anyone who's giving advice, they did a study recently. Was it in the book Magnificent Sex? Where they were noticing that the people who actually had gone to sex therapists were having more sexual problems.
Yes.
And the reason why was because sex therapy, as it is right now, has a tendency to be rather prescriptive. I think the kind of trend nowadays is lube, vibrators, and threesomes,
Yeah.
which there's nothing wrong with any of those. But if it disconnects you from your own, what you talk a lot about, erotic IQ or your own sexual sovereignty, then you're no longer really discovering what it is that you truly like and where that meets the person that's across from you, which again gets back to what we were speaking about, being in hobbies, being playful, having that curiosity and that desire to explore. Now, what ends up happening is if you just shut your mind off and go, this is the way that it is, then you're going to end up going into routine. So, threesomes, I think, can be amazing experiences.
Mhm.
However, where I think people can go off with that is if they are outsourcing a boring relationship. They're like, oh, you know what? Things aren't really great at home. Therefore, now I'm going to outsource and find something else to bring some life in versus, hey, we're in a really good space. Do we want to explore this together?
Yeah.
So it's two very different ways that one goes about a threesome there. Typically, if you do it because you're outsourcing, then you're going to find the third person more interesting because they're the new piece of whatever. And
Right.
then the attention goes there. And then you look back at your partner and you're like, maybe the first time you get really excited about each other because you did something naughty, you did something that was a taboo. And so then you're both turned on by it. But eventually, the taboo isn't there and you just start to find the other person more interesting. However, if you're both in a really good space, then all of a sudden it becomes a shared experience that helps you maybe even discover new things about your own partner because the environment, the setting, the scenario has changed. And now all of a sudden it's actually driving you into deeper intimacy. So do you
Right.
feel closer or farther away from your partner in the long run would be how I would look at, do I recommend a threesome or not? It
Mhm.
really depends on the couple.
But the one thing that is safe to explore, and I think you would already be great at it, is you do the threesome fantasy and you can design it any way you want. And you just can get to see, I remember once in a fantasy, I'm like, I don't want them here anymore. Then we can tell them to fuck off. It doesn't hurt anyone's feelings. So there's a really fun way and it really opens erotic space quite a lot just in the fantasy aspect. So if you're with a partner who's a little intimidated or nervous, then you can explore that way first and just for them to go, oh, you mean you would actually say no, or you would actually make my no, you would respect that. And then once that trust is there just through the fantasy, then in the reality, it can become a really great thing. I remember a couple that we were supporting in this way. And so they were exploring and then they went out to find somebody. And the biggest turn on at the end of the evening was that the guy said no to the new person. And then they went home and had amazing sex for the rest of the week. And they were like, wow, just in saying no, it made everything really hot. So there's a whole spectrum, but being conscious, being respectful, making sure everyone who is involved, their needs are heard and STI talk is on the table, all of that so that everybody feels safe and healthy and good. Then it can also be just a really wonderful sexual experience.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you guys on the podcast. Learned quite a few new things. And
Great to be here, Jay.
yes, thanks for coming. Where can people find your work?
Yeah. Embodiedlove.love is the main URL at this time. But also we had mentioned the YAF app. So YAF.com, if the guys want to check out that resource. And we're on social media. You can check us out.
So basically, yeah, if you're a couple, then also you have 9 naughty nights. But if you are dealing with like your therapist or you're dealing with sexual dysfunction, then you can also go to
Living.
livingadamo.com. And that's where you'll find the protocol that we constructed there with Dr. Mo.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Thanks
Thank
for coming
you.
on.
Thanks for having us.
67% of listeners aren't subscribed to the show, so please don't forget to show your support by hitting the subscribe button now. You'll not only be supporting the show, but also investing in yourself and your health journey, all while helping to keep us ad-free.